get by. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Wise here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. Today is no different. I have Jeffrey Madoff, and Jeffrey, you can check him out at acreativecareer.com and madoffproductions.com. Jeffrey, before I formally introduce you, I always like to point out other episodes people should check out of the podcast. Dear friend, Brian Kurtz, who you know very well, he may be the only one who's been on 3 times over the past decade. Just an amazing human being, direct response marketer. You know, we were talking a little bit, and I'll have Jeffrey, you'll talk about this, which is, what does success mean? And this is one of the things I really admire about Brian, because I see him and he's a family man. He has amazing relationships. And to me, that is huge success. And I really admired him from the get-go. And I know you're very cut from the same cloth and very similar, and know Brian well. So check those out. He sent over 2 billion pieces, I think, of direct response in his career. And so there's something to be learned there. Tom Bilyeu, the founder of Quest Nutrition, who, Jeffrey, you have actually interviewed too, and you talk about him in your book. And that was a really good one. He started Quest Nutrition. Chris Voss, Never Split the Difference, another favorite episode. Again, I know you know Chris as well. Ken Glickman, Lessons from a Lifetime of Marketing Expertise. And so the funny thing is, I'm surprised we didn't meet earlier, Jeffrey, because there's so many connections. I know Michael Roderick has talked about you and so many people, but check those episodes out on InspiredInsider.com. And this episode is brought to you by Rise 25. At Rise 25, we help businesses give to and connect to their dream relationships and partnerships. And how do we do that? We do that by helping you run your podcast. We're an easy button for a company to launch and run a podcast. And we do the strategy, the accountability, and the full execution. Jeffrey, we've talked about this. We're kind of like the magic elves that run in the background to make it look easy for the hosts so they can create amazing content, create amazing relationships, and run their business. You know, for me, the number one thing in my life is relationships. And I'm always looking at ways to give to my best relationships. And I found no better way over the past decade to profile the people and companies I most admire and share with the world what they're working on. So if you've thought about podcasting, you should. If you have questions, you can go to rise25.com. And it's funny because, Jeffrey, you even mentioned podcasting in your book, and it's under the realm of consistency, right? And so I think I've been publishing around 2 episodes a week for over 10 years because I love it. And I learned a lot from this. It made me study the life and the work of Jeffrey Madoff, which is hugely valuable for me. So I suggest everyone check out his book. And when you go to acreativecareer.com, you can check it out there. And big thank you to Bill Cates, who runs a marketing agency, who, it's funny, it takes Bill to introduce us, who I don't know that well, as opposed to all the other people. But thanks, Bill. And check out hereisyourfire.com. So without further ado, I want to formally introduce Jeffrey Madoff. He's the founder of Madoff Productions, and they collaborate with ad agencies, public relations firms, directly with clients to produce commercials, live streaming events, and other content. He's very selective at this point with the people he works with, but I'll talk about some of his work and who he's worked with over the years. He actually began his career as a fashion designer, okay? And if you're thinking the amazing streets of New York or LA, you'd be wrong. Okay. He started an likely place, I guess you'd call it, in Wisconsin. But he was chosen one of the top 10 designers in the US, built a company to over 100 people. He ended up switching careers to film and video production, and he's edited and directed award-winning commercials, documentaries, and content from clients like Ralph Lauren, Victoria's Secret, Revlon, Gucci, Godiva, and so many more. Also, they've helped private equity firms too, and investment banks as well. So they have a wide range of clients. He's authored, as I mentioned, Creative Careers, Making a Living with Your Ideas. It was an Amazon bestseller. It was based actually on the class that he developed and taught at Parsons School of Design. And he's a playwright and producer. And the play is called Personality, the Lloyd Price musical. He's been a featured speaker on creating a brand and creativity at the Wharton School, Princeton, NYU, Google Next, and many others. And the most important part of his whole bio is he went to University of Wisconsin. And fun fact, he was on the wrestling team of all things. So don't mess with Jeffrey. Jeffrey, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me on. And I guess that about wraps everything up. I have nothing to add to what
Nothing
you said.
else.
That's very good. Thank you.
I had to include all of that because it's a pretty storied career and keeps going. And I just wanted to start with, kind of the origin of the book, and which came out of your talks. I know you talk all over. So if someone is looking for a keynote or a speaker, they can go to A Creative Career and contact Jeffrey directly. But talk about the origin of the book and what came out of Parsons School of Design.
Well, the course that I teach, which is the same name as the book, Creative Careers, Making a Living with Your Ideas, came about because people said, this is such a cool class, but you have like 60 students. And some people, actually people we know in common, audited the class, but it was about getting the ideas out there because ideas need to be shared in order to have any value. And so, for a few years, people were telling me, write a book. And I said, yeah, but then what do I do with it? Because I knew nothing about the publishing world at all, or even getting an agent or any of that. And once I started focusing on that, I learned a lot about it, and am still learning about it. And the idea of the book was to just spread these ideas and hopefully trigger people in a way that would help them pursue the kind of dreams, passions, desires they have, and make a living with the things they love doing.
You include a lot of interesting stories, and not just your stories, but other people's stories in here. Talk about some of the reasons you chose some of these people. I know you mentioned Kathy Ireland a bunch of times. You talk about Damon John. I mentioned Tom Bilyeu. What was the thought process on including some of these people in the book?
It's the same process for everybody, which is, do they have an interesting story? Do I care about what they do? Because like you, I don't think I'd want to spend an hour talking to somebody that I don't care about what they do. So what they do is interesting. So up on the screen there, you have Michael Arad, who designed the 9/11 memorial, which is an extraordinary thing. I mean, his work is going to be around forever. It's like talking to whoever designed the Lincoln Memorial or the Washington Monument. I mean, it's kind of incredible. Kathy Ireland, I happen to have shot Kathy for Ralph Lauren, the Ralph Lauren collection, late 80s, mid 80s. And my wife found a picture of she and I together. I didn't really know that she had grown a multi-billion-dollar global business. And then just pure serendipity, I saw a commercial or a news segment about her and what she had done. So I reached out to Kathy and sent her the picture of the two of us together. And she came in and did my class at Parsons on entrepreneurship. And it was great. Damon John and I met through a mutual friend, to Joe Polish. And Damon and I just immediately hit it off because we both had fashion backgrounds, ended up knowing a lot of people in common. And so, it was all about, wow, they're doing really interesting stuff. Tim Ferriss becomes a global sensation with the 4-hour work week, which probably it should be called the 60-hour work week, but the 4-hour work week became a phenomenon. And I think it's just really interesting what people do. And Joy Reid, she's a host on MSNBC. She has her own program, and the Reid Report, and she's I'm fascinated by journalism, by what is news, by the discussions around that. So I've kind of got boundless curiosity, and all of the people that I have in are, I suspect, not unlike you, people that I'm really interested in talking to. If I could sit down and just have a cup of coffee with them, it's just, I learn from them, and it fuels my curiosity. And I think curiosity fuels creativity. So it all works together.
I do want to talk about what does success mean before we get to you. And I know it's not just money and things, it's family. And if you're watching there is an audio part, but there's a video part too. So if you're watching the video, you're looking right now. We're at Madoff Productions website, and you can see all these things that you produced, from Victoria's Secret to these runways. This kind of, I think of what does success mean, and I know you're big in family, but what does your wife think? This is the work. Like, you're filming this stuff, right? And she sees a picture with Kathy Ireland. You're with these celebrities. You're with, Victoria's Secret models. What's that conversation like with your wife when she sees these things, or when you go back?
Well, my wife, we met actually on a job about, God, probably 37 years ago. And she was a model. And, because you tend to meet the kind of people that you work with and hang out with. And so she knows the business. And honestly, I could make a bunch of funny cracks, but it was never an issue. It's like people would say to me, "Oh, God, you traveled with the Victoria's Secret models, and wow, what was that like?" Well, it was like getting up at 5 a.m, and doing the shoot, which was fun, but it's a lot of work. And you finish the day, and then you have a pre-production meeting for the next morning, and it was a lot of fun. It's great making images with the models, and the ones that I worked with and had the pleasure of working with were very professional. This is their profession, and they take it seriously. And so it never was a thing. I could make up some, orgy story, but the reality is we're all there working.
Yeah. No. So talk about what success means to you.
Well, to me, what success means, there's business success and there's personal success. And to me, that's a distinctive difference. Business success to me is being in the position to say no without any catastrophic financial consequences, so I can do what I want to do. And personal success is the integrity and the maintenance of the relationships that are most important to me. And really loving others and being loved back. That's personal success. And so I'm very fortunate. Most of my closest friends I've known for most of my life. Pre-kindergarten, third grade. And so relationships, I think, are the true currency in life. And I know you believe that too. So business is one thing, and I like it because I do fun work. I work very hard, but it's I'm paid well for it, and get to travel, meet interesting people, and all of that. And that's all great, because I wouldn't consider myself successful if I hated what I did, even if I made a lot of money. That's not success to me. Success is directly tied in, and this is business and personal, into gratification and fulfillment.
I want to touch on some fun stories and lessons from different parts of your career. Okay. I want to start with one of my favorite stories from the book. Monkey poop. Okay.
Talk about what chapter that should have been a great, or the title of the book, actually.
Hopefully it has a better subhead if you named it that. But talk about the lessons there, and what am I what was the scene surrounding this?
See, I'm in an interesting position now, Jeremy, because I could say, I don't know what you're talking about. Why are you focusing on monkey poop? Uh, but there is a real story behind it, as you know. Uh, I'm from Akron, Ohio originally, and there was a new shopping mall that was opening, and I needed a job. And I think I was 16 or 17. And the family shoe store was going to be opening. And they had placed an ad for someone who was, and in those times, you could actually be more specific in advertising for a job than you can now. So they wanted somebody who was married, over 22, and had at least 2 years of shoe selling experience. I was 16, single, and never sold a shoe. But I had sold things before, many things. Did door-to-door sales. I did all kinds of stuff. So the boss, there's two lessons here. The guy that ran the store said, look, I really enjoy you. You're fun. You're a bright kid, but you meet none of the criteria for the job. I can't hire you. I can't do it. I'd love to do it. I just can't do it. And I said, well, I convinced you, and it's got to be harder to sell you than selling a pair of shoes. And he said, look, I just can't do it. It's just against the company policy. And so as I'm leaving, he came out after me. He said, Jeff, and he stopped me. He said, all right, you got the fucking job. And I laughed. So what happened? He said, you're right. If you could sell me on yourself, that's a lot harder than selling a pair of shoes. You got the job. So I love the fact that he was broke with policy because he saw in me some promise that could help their business, which in fact I did. And so that was really cool. Well, because it was a family shoe store, now we get to the real meat or the poop of this issue. They had a monkey in the back of the store, which would never fly these days.
That's so bizarre. Yeah.
It's so bizarre. It's true. And so one of the first conflicts I had when I was there, because I was by far the youngest salesperson in the store, and the assistant manager said to me, clean out the monkey cage. And I said to him, do you clean out the monkey cage? He said, no, I told you to clean out the monkey cage. I said, I'll take my turn if everybody else does it, but I'm not going to do it if everybody else doesn't do it. He said, well, you'll do what I tell you. And I said, no, I won't. I wasn't hired to be a zookeeper. I was hired to sell shoes. And Bob, the manager who hired me, overheard the conversation, and he stepped in and he said, Jimmy, who was the assistant manager, why don't you show us all how to clean out the cage? And from now on, we'll all take our turn and we'll all do that job. And I thought that was really great, that I felt heard, acknowledged, and that Bob had a sense of fairness about him. And, I wasn't going to do that just because I was the youngest. I was hired for the same reason everybody else was, sell shoes. So if part of the job that we all share in is cleaning up monkey poop, okay, I'll take my turn, but I'm not going to be the only one that does it. And the monkey, whose name was Solo, and at that time, which was in the late 60s, everybody thought there was a monkey naming contest. And store employees are the ones that decided on the winning name. And everybody thought that it was Solo based on Napoleon Solo, who was a James Bond-like character in a very popular TV show called The Man from U.N.C.L.E. That's not why we named him Solo. We named him Solo because what the monkey did all day long was masturbate and hurl feces. And so we thought Solo would really be a perfect name because it describes what that monkey does in the store. And so, mothers would be with their kids, and she'd want to try on. She was go look at the monkey, kids. And then she'd glance over there and see the monkey furiously trying to please itself. Get away from the monkey cage, So it was nuts. It was very funny. Fortunately, ASPCA policy has made it so that that kind of thing doesn't exist anymore. But it was a weird sideshow at a family shoe store.
So if you like this story, also get the book. But seriously, there's so many good stories and lessons learned in that one, in leadership and fairness with your boss from the shoe store. So I want to fast. So the book should have been called Monkey Poop to Victoria's Secret or something like that, Jeffrey. But let's fast forward a little bit to University of Wisconsin and some lessons learned in building an actual fashion brand. And by the way, for people listening, Jeffrey was a philosophy major, so he was not majoring in design or anything like that at school. What were some of the lessons building up that company?
Well, those were, first of all, I believe everything you do informs everything else you do. So they're not so disparate. I had a double major in philosophy and psychology. Well, now a huge thing in business is behavioral economics. Why do people buy what they buy? Why do they decide what they decide? Why do they believe what they believe? Something I always found fascinating, but in the past 15 years, that's had tremendous applications in business, and it's only growing. So, things aren't necessarily as siloed as they initially seemed to be. I learned so many lessons in terms of the fashion business, which apply to all businesses, and hiring people. And how do you hire people? How do you settle disputes? How do you create really fruitful collaborations? What are the basic lessons in business? Because there's so many self-help books out there, most of which I think are useless, because you can't replicate somebody else's life and somebody else's circumstances. So there's best practices, which is really important in business, but then it's about relationships. And I think everything comes back to relationships. And relationships are so important. And that's not taught in business school. And that's not taught, to you when you start working someplace. And the relationships have so much to do with one's success in business. And I think ultimately success in life is so based on that. But, I learned so many things because they were so formative at a young time in my life that it's hard to single out specific episodes.
You built the company up to over 100 people. What were some of the things you were selling, just to give people an idea?
So I designed men's and women's clothing. And, pretty early on, I started getting a lot of publicity. I was in Vogue and Glamour and Esquire and Playboy, Gentleman's Quarterly, Glamour, all kinds of different magazines. And at that time, magazines were doing an iteration of what's ended up being social media, which is getting word out there, creating followings and all of that. And so, my fashion business got known through the publicity that I got. And I was kind of an outlier, not being based in New York, but I sold to many of the best stores in New York. So it was interesting. But one of the big things that I learned, and I'm fortunate to have learned it young, is that I was employing like 120 people. And I realized I don't want to do that. And so my film production company, when I transitioned to that, I had a core group. And then the film business is very much a freelance business. So there's freelance cinematographers, production assistants, makeup artists, stylists, on and on and on. And I realized I like functioning like that much better than I like having a really big staff. Because the bigger your staff gets, the further away you tend to get from the things you really enjoy doing and why you started the business in the first place. So I learned that lesson really young. And that was a tremendously important lesson to learn. And, there were just things that happened all the time that helped me inform myself and make better decisions as I moved forward.
What would be an example of something that was in the magazine? Like if we were to picture it.
But yeah, it might be a picture of like was a very big deal back then to be on the cover of Women's Wear Daily because that was the main fashion trade publication. And I was one of my designs was the front page of that paper, which got me tremendous exposure, very early on. So it was often, a picture of an outfit or something like that. Sometimes I'd be interviewed. I made up insane stories during the interviews. Like when I was chosen one of the top 10 young designers in the United States. And I was interviewed by a lot of press. I'd never been interviewed before. So I decided I want to have fun with this. What can I do? And so I made up an insane story about how I became a designer, which got published all over the place. And my dad said to me, I showed him the article, and he said, "You actually told him this shit?" I said, "Yeah." And he laughed and he said, "And they wrote it?" I said, "Well, you're holding it." Yeah. And it was very funny. And I learned lessons about public relations, and marketing that were kind of fun. But for me, it was really about the fun of it, not developing strategic thinking around it, because I tend to glaze over when it gets too academic like that. But creating stories, which is what a brand is. A brand is a good story that resonates emotionally with people. And that's what, good press is. And that's what good stories are. So it was a lot of fun. So I learned about that.
How did you originally, what was the kind of inception of getting covered in this? I imagine someone discovered you somehow, or the clothing. Do you remember one of those key moments, and why did they even contact you?
Well, they have a job to do, and the job is to give readers a reason. Back in that time, now it's to revisit your Instagram account, or that sort of thing. But in those days, it was to come back and buy the publication. So they knew who their audience was, and so they wanted to refresh all the time to give you a reason to buy it the next month and the next month or the next day, in the sense of Women's Wear Daily. So they're always on the lookout for new ideas, new designers, new products, all of that sort of a thing. So I was a novelty because I was selling to Bloomingdale's, which at that time was the top department store in the United States, to some of the top specialty stores in the United States. Yet I'm some kid from Wisconsin at that time. It was right after college. And so I was a novelty. And then, I'd come into New York for some of the shows, the trade shows, to sell the clothes, and buyers would come in and they all talked to each other because the fashion press would talk to the influential buyers. And there's just all this crosstalk that goes on. And then people, reach out. There was a guy from AMC Stores, which is one of the largest department store groups in the United States. It's no longer the case. They were huge. And I get a phone call. And my factory, by the way, was in Footville, Wisconsin. I'm sure you've heard of it.
I've been there many times.
Yes. It's right near, it's a left turn from Ankleville, but anyhow, this guy calls me, and I didn't know who he was. And he was at that time the most influential department store buyer in the country. And he said, he gets me on the phone and he had tracked me down. And he said, I was walking in San Francisco and I see this guy wearing a shirt I thought was amazing. And I wanted to find out who made that shirt? Whose shirt is that? And the guy must have thought I was crazy. I stopped him and I said, who made your shirt? Whose shirt is that? He said, it's my shirt. He said, no, who made it? Let me look. And he turns the guy around and the guy doesn't know what's going on. And he looks at the label, Billy Whiskers, which was the name of my company. Where'd you get this? And so the guy thought he was nuts. And he said, yeah, that store, he mentions the store, wherever it was in San Francisco. And he said, so I tracked you down in Footville, Wisconsin. Where the hell is Footville, Wisconsin? And so I listened to this guy talk for like 3 minutes as if he had had 17 cups of coffee injected into his carotid artery. And I said to him, who is this?
By the way.
And he said, yeah, by the way, who are you? And so he said, I'm Bernie Ozer. And Bernie was like a very big deal in the world at that time. And, he was quite a character. And he said, well, aren't you proud of me? I found out where you are. This is great detective work, finding out Footville, Wisconsin. Where in the hell is that? That sort of a thing. And so he invited me to his office my next trip to New York, invited me to dinner first. And it was with Andy Warhol's group of people from the factory. And I mean, it was crazy. This is in the late 60s, early 70s. And it was, amazing. But discovery was a huge part of the fashion business. Now, just like it's very parallel, by the way, to the independent film business, which in the 70s boomed, with Scorsese and Coppola and just these great directors telling unique stories that were outside the studio system. Well, that's what the design world was like. And then, like the film world got basically co-opted and bought by major studios, the clothing companies in the last 15, 20 years have been bought by major companies. And so a lot of the really interesting creative edge is gone. But at that time, there was a whole lot to do with the joy of discovery. And everybody was on the hunt for something that was new and cool. So it was really a fascinating time. Same thing happened in the music business, by the way. The Beatles demonstrated that music could be a huge business. And
just to give people a sense, Jeffrey, at that time when you're running the clothing business, how old are you at the time?
I started the company when I was 21. And young people they weren't called startups, but, young people doing business was not a thing then. It was unusual, but my parents are entrepreneurs. My sister is an entrepreneur. She's had her own business for almost 50 years. So I didn't grow up thinking, God, I'd really like to land a good job. It was always to be that I'd start a business. I never thought about ever getting a job.
What'd your parents do?
They were retailers. They had women's and children's fashion companies, the fashion retail.
Yeah.
So very young, when my parents would have me come into the store and I would receive merchandise and, check the quantities against the packing order and then their original order and all that, I did learn things, markup from wholesale to retail. And even when I was a young kid, I was learning things about business by osmosis because I'd worked in my parents' store. My sister went into fashion retail herself. I took a totally different direction, but everything I learned helped inform me and prepare me for what I did.
The next piece, is the content and video piece. How did you eventually get hooked up with Victoria's Secret?
It was funny. Things happen through a kind of serendipity oftentimes, like you and I meeting. We knew so many people in common, but we didn't know each other, which was kind of wild. And the person that I knew most recently, Bill Cates, is the one you knew most recently, and he's the one that ended up introducing us. So you never know as things ricochet around and pinball around, how things are going to happen. Well, entered the E channel, which was relatively new at that time, was going to be doing they wanted to do a special documentary on the making of the Victoria's Secret fashion show, which was not a big deal then, but this was going to be Victoria's Secret's first show in New York. So it's this brand out of Columbus, Ohio, that coined the term supermodels, that was going to be doing a fashion show at, I think it was at the Plaza Hotel in New York. Whole new venture. So I was contacted by the E Channel because of the work I did with Ralph Lauren and with Halston. They wanted me to direct this special, and so I went to a meeting. I was invited to a meeting that Victoria's Secret was having with the people who were producing their first show, and the two people from Victoria's Secret were interested in what my point of view was and asked me some things because they didn't quite understand what they were being pitched by these other people. And I said to them, I'm just here as an observer. It's not appropriate for me to give you any opinions of what I think of what they're doing. And I was like, what? And so after the meeting, they said, we want to meet with you separately. And so we met at my studio. They saw some of my work, really liked it. And then nothing happened for like 6 months. And then I got a call that they wanted me to do their next show. And we met and hit it off. And I worked with them for 26 years. They were a client.
One of my favorite stories of the book, Jeffrey, is about expectations. Okay. Because you were kind of ahead of your time as far as they did an online launch. And it was interesting because the same outcome could have happened and everyone would have been upset. But because you set expectations, they were thrilled. So can you just talk about what you did there when you set expectations for that online launch?
Yeah, we were going to do the first live streaming fashion show. And this is back in, I think it was like 1997 or something like that. So the largest event that had been online was, and by the way, there wasn't broadband at that point. Video quality was crappy. But the largest event, which I think had 350,000 viewers, was John Glenn when he went back into space. So we met with, at Victoria's Secret's offices in New York, we met with Yahoo and AOL to talk to them about, because nobody had enough bandwidth to stream a live show. So they had to join together in order to do that. And so I had done my research and I knew also what the expectation was of Victoria's Secret. So I said to people, there was Seth Godin was with Yahoo. So that he and I met then. I forget the person from AOL. And I said, tell them what's going to happen if they meet their numbers, because they said they'd get more than 1 million people, which is, 3 times more than the John Glenn thing had. And there wasn't enough capacity for that. And they didn't say anything. And I said, tell them what's going to happen. And they didn't say anything. And then Ed Razik from Victoria's Secret said to me, well, what's going to happen? And I said, your site's going to crash. They said, oh my God, what is horrible. What are we going to, is that true? And they said, yeah, that probably is true. What are we going to do about it? And I said, what you're going to do about it is the concert's sold out. You make it a positive that there was such demand, you crash the internet. That's a much bigger story than if everything went well, because nobody cares, what you're streaming on the internet yet. So that is in fact what happened, is that it did crash. It became, it was written up in the Wall Street Journal. It was all over the place. Victoria's Secret crashes the internet. They didn't really crash the internet. They crashed that particular aspect of it. And so that ended up being, a real story. And that's where marketing and PR come in, is how do you spin that story to the advantage of the company? I mean, that's what PR is.
Another, piece that struck me in the book is Ralph Lauren, and that you had to push back, actually, on you were creating a video for Ralph on the 50th anniversary, I believe.
I think
Can
it's
you
actually
talk
his lifetime achievement award.
lifetime achievement? Yeah. And the interesting part to me was, I don't know if people are used to pushing back on Ralph Lauren or not. But you definitely wanted a specific story, and it wasn't received with necessarily open arms. Okay. So can you talk about your thought process on just continuing to push back on what you thought should be created for this?
Well, as a general principle, I believe that if you hire me, you're interested in my opinions. Otherwise, why hire me? So that was, and relationships, as you well know, are based on trust. And so I had been working with Ralph. This one you're showing is the 50th anniversary, which I directed. The fashion show. It was huge in Central Park. But Ralph's Lifetime Achievement Award was a very big deal. It was held at Lincoln Center. Audrey Hepburn was going to introduce the film. And I was at Ralph's home for dinner with he and his wife. And we were talking about the what kind of film to create for the Lifetime Achievement Award ceremony. And I saw these photo albums that he had, beautifully bound photo albums that showed him when he was a kid and his relatives and things that nobody had ever seen before. And I said, I want to use these images to start it off. And he said, no. And I said, no, I think it's, you've got all these beautiful images out there, but they're all advertising images. Even the shots with your family, these are shots that, Bruce Weber did, and they're beautiful. But I want to show the humanity of who you are. This is a Lifetime Achievement Award. So let's show who you are. And he said, no. And so coincidentally, and it was truly a coincidence, I had a DVD of the video that I had made for my parents' 50th anniversary, because we're going back to now like 1991 or two. And I showed Ralph and Ricky, his wife, the video I did for my parents. And at the end of it, they're crying. And Ralph said, I'm crying. I don't even know these people. And I said, well, I want to do that for you. And the only way I can do that and not just make it look like a commercial is to use those pictures. And he said, okay. And it's interesting because one of Ralph's metrics for whether something really works or not is if it hits him emotionally. So he had a very sensitive gauge. And by the way, I worked with Ralph for 38 years. I never had a contract. And I felt like as long as I can keep bringing value to what you're doing and you want me, great. But if I'm not, then get somebody else. So we had a real trust. And I was able to convince him to do that. And then I'm sitting in the audience at Lincoln Center, and Audrey Hepburn comes out and she gives this wonderful introduction, and the room goes black. And I knew that it would be the first image, which is Ralph as a baby. This is either going to work or it's going to bomb. And the fashion industry is a pretty jaded group of people. It's a tough audience. And so I'm just sitting there, and it seemed like quite a while waiting as the lights faded out, the screen lights up, and you see this picture of Ralph as a baby. And he's one of these people that had the same face since he was a little kid. There are some people you can just recognize, and some people bear no resemblance to what they look like as a little kid. Well, he looked like that. And when the picture came up, there was this collective, oh, from the audience. And I knew I nailed it. And it was great. And it was very, very well received. And I think that, whenever you're in a job situation, if you're hired to do something and you believe strongly in what it is you're offering, make the case for it. Some people call that pushing back, but I do it out of what I believe is going to be successful for my client. It's not an ego exercise. This is going to work. And here's why I think it's going to work. And I have reasons for it. If I hadn't had my parents' 50th anniversary DVD with me, I would not have been able to sell the show.
Why do you think he resisted at first to that suggestion?
That's a great question, because I think this is something that permeates our culture, which is he has a certain brand image of who he is. And this is letting people behind the mask.
It's like a vulnerability thing.
Yes. And most people do not want to be vulnerable in that way. He could have been, in his mind, potentially, and that's just my conjecture, humiliated by that. Why is Ralph showing a baby picture of him? That kind of a thing, because that's like that. But fortunately, he had the trust in me, and I was able to give him a compelling reason why this would work. And it worked gloriously. And that's because he trusted me. And I think, again, seeing my parents thing, he thought of it more of as a movie, and it had an emotional connection to him. And that's how Ralph gauges things.
I love that story. So thanks for sharing. Some lessons from Dan Sullivan.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the things that you've learned? I know you're friends, colleagues with Dan, and you even have a lot of podcast episodes together, and you talk about them. What's something that sticks out with Dan that you've taken away or learned?
Dan and I, we do a podcast together once a month, and we really enjoy talking to each other. And we have many divergent ideas, but the thing that's interesting about it is that we are both very open. We're both very curious. We both always hear each other out, and we spark off of each other in a really wonderful way. And it's really great. And I can't say that I've learned anything specifically, in terms of lessons, because we just really enjoy talking to each other and seeing where that takes us. But I knew that in terms of curiosity and the importance of it, the importance of being open, all of those things. Dan, though, does have certain phrases that I love, like one of his things with the play, and Dan is an investor in my play. And one of the things about the play is he said, I love what you're doing and I love the play. And he has an itch about theater that this scratches, and it helps him be involved, or allows him to be involved in something that he finds really interesting. But he said, you're doing something that is bigger than you have ever done before. And he said, I believe, and this is the part that I love. And he said, I believe in making your future bigger than your past. And Dan has some of these kinds of phrases which just really nail it in a really cool way. And that was very cool and very succinct, because that is in fact true. This is the biggest thing I've ever embarked on. It's the biggest creative, intellectual, and business challenge that I have undertaken. And it's the biggest expression of what I believe to be my talents and my capabilities. And, Dan also has another phrase, which I really love, which is unique ability. That's kind of the cornerstone of his thoughts. And defining one's unique ability is so important in terms of building your business and even your own self-esteem and personal success. So Dan has concepts that I wouldn't really call lessons, but concepts that I think are really valuable, and we spark to those and play off of each other in a really wonderful way. And which I have tremendous gratitude for. And when he approached me to do the podcast, it was based on the fact that when he and I get together, we have great conversations and we enjoy each other. So that's how the podcast came about. And those are the things from Dan that he has codified that I really like. It's great to explore those ideas.
Jeffrey, why write a play? It's, again, another difficult undertaking. Like the fashion business, it's not just writing a play, it's actually producing it, getting it out there. It's a whole separate commercial endeavor. What made you decide to go on that path?
I met Lloyd Price. And here's here's an example of what I mean about serendipity. I did the 75th anniversary film for Radio City Music Hall, which was really cool. It was part of the Christmas spectacular, and they ended up using it for 7 years. It was just going to be for 1 year. And it was very cool to do the project and shoot the Rockettes and shoot in Radio City. The executive producer, John Bonanni, who hired me, we got along great and established a really nice relationship. He left Radio City, but we stayed friends. And he called me up and said, "Do you know who Lloyd Price is?" I said, "Mr. Personality?" "Yeah, I know who he is. You know anything about him?" And I said, "No, but I love Personality. I love Stagger Lee, and I love Lottie Miss Claudie, but no, I don't know anything about him." And he goes, "Well, we go to the same eye doctor. I'm here in the waiting room with him." And we were talking, and we want to do a short documentary about him. I think you two would really hit it off. When we finish here, can we come over to your office? Sure. So I met Lloyd. We did really hit it off. We ended up becoming very, very close friends. And when I did this documentary and I researched him, I realized, God, there's an amazing story here, and it needs to be told because it's about things that are very important to me. It's about human rights, race, music, popular culture, all of these things that I find very, very interesting and fruitful to explore. And Lloyd's story, he was an unsung hero. He broke down the wall that was called race records, where you could only buy records that were done by Black artists in Black-owned record stores. But his first song back in 1952, Lottie Miss Claudie, was the first song by a teenager that sold over 1 million copies. So Lloyd is Black. Nobody's prejudiced against green, which is money. And so he really opened the floodgates and is one of the cornerstone figures of rock and roll, because prior to that, the music business was an adult business. Kids didn't buy records. It was an amazing story. And people said to me, I love your question, because people said to me, "Well, why don't you make a film? You know how to make films. Why a play?" And I said, I love film, but I love the immediacy of live and how when I see theater, it makes me feel. And I sort of dug deeper into that in the sense that I think in live presentations, and this is true in sports, it's true in music, it's true, of course, on stage on plays, but probably the biggest the biggest example or best example is a comedian. The feedback is immediate. So if you tell a joke and people don't laugh, you better learn how to recover quick. And I think any live performance, there's a high element of risk because things can go wrong. So you have to be nimble, you have to be quick. How can you do that? And so I wanted to write it as a play. And I've never let my ignorance, I didn't know anything about fashion design either. I didn't know anything about filmmaking before I started doing it. So I never let ignorance stop me, because if you're stupid, it's forever. If you're ignorant, you can learn. And learning is something that I love. And it goes back to curiosity being the main fuel to creativity. And so I wanted to do a play. And the reason I'm producing it is because nobody was going to produce a play by me. I was total unknown. Nobody knew anything about it. And I had to change the perception of me from, well, who the hell is Jeff Madoff, to who the hell is Jeff Madoff? And because I've attracted Tony Award-winning talent, really fantastically gifted people that I work with to bring this to life. And it's been fantastic. And that's actually one of the things Dan Sullivan and I have explored a lot, because he's seen every iteration of the play, is how business and theater are so much aligned. It's really interesting. So that's why I wanted to do a play. I wanted to make people feel like I feel when I am emotionally moved by a great piece of theater.
Love it.
And that's a really that's a core thing to me, because that feeling is wonderful, and I love it, and it's different every night, which is really cool.
Jeffrey, I want to be the first one to thank you. Thanks for sharing your journey, your lessons. I want to encourage people to check out, you could see on the screen here, acreativecareer.com. To learn more. You can check out the book, and you can go get it wherever you buy books. And it's amazing. I listened to the whole thing. Creative Careers, making a living with your ideas. If you are listening to this and you know of someone, or you yourself are looking for a speaker to your organization or keynote, Jeffrey takes some selective items of those engagements throughout the year. So feel free to contact him, but check out acreativecareer.com. And Jeffrey, I want to be the first one to thank you so much.
We're
Thanks,
the only
everyone.
other one on here, so who else could thank me? I'd like to thank myself for being here.
Exactly. Thanks for sharing everything.
Thanks for having me on. It was a lot of fun. Thanks, Jeremy.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I'm feeling like $100 grand.